Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love by Is This Self-Care? Narrated by S.E.P. Author notes for this chapter. Fictional nuns are allowed to be unhinged, as a treat. Enjoy the Pride and Prejudice homage in the later part of this chapter. Chapter 34. Deus Ex Machina. The sky turned black with the whirl of black robes. "What the fuck?" asked a werewolf. "Who is that?" asked another. "Nuns?" said the first. "Are you bloody joking?" said Greyback. The werewolves looked up in confusion. Then they began to laugh. Again. The nuns moved through the air together with a collaborative fluidity that could have been a warning to Greyback, if he hadn't been so busy howling with laughter. A few werewolves sent up spells. They were met with ruthless counter-curses that left the casters disfigured upon the ground, missing the majority of their faces. There was a bit of a shock, a bit of cognitive dissonance to wrestle with. Some of the werewolves began to shout and regroup. Greyback was still gasping with mockery. The nuns lined themselves above them and, wands pointed down, group cast some sort of area effect petrificus totalis that froze everyone where they stood. Draco felt his limbs stiffen beyond the curse. Granger grew unnaturally still. Greyback's laugh was frozen upon his bloodied face. Silence fell. A small, white-haired nun who flew above the rest cast a detection spell at the field. Greyback was illuminated in red. The nun tutted in silence. With a swish of her wand, Greyback's rigid body was floated into the center of the field and dropped with a crunch into the blood and muck near the boulder. "Clear the innocents," said in French, waving her hand. There was imperiousness in the gesture. She was used to command. She was the prioress. A contingent of nuns flew down and levitated the figures out of the battlefield. From the insignia upon their cloaks, it was the Aurors and the DMLE operatives. Draco saw Tonks Granger, Buckley, and Gogan's stiff forms lifted out. Then he was, himself, levitated, jostling against Granger, Potter, and Weasley. They were deposited at the very top of the ridge. When the innocents had been cleared and only Greyback's men remained on the field, the prioress flew higher. "Shall we have a summoning?" she asked. The nuns, cackling anew, whirled over the battlefield upon their brooms. Threads of violet magic glowed between them until they formed a floating pentagram. The prioress raised her wand, as did her sisters. They began a low chant in Latin. Shocks of occult magic coursed through the air. Dark, forbidden, dangerous. A shape ossified into existence where the currents of magic concentrated at the center of the field. It was a grinning goat's skull, silent and inert. "Who will be the sacrificial lamb?" asked the prioress. A nun floated a bloody-faced wizard up, one of the ones who had begun the attack on the nuns. "I have a sinner." The sinner was levitated towards the goat skull. His screams, muffled by his petrified tongue and clamped jaw, echoed across the silent field. The nun flew above him and brought him in close until his forehead pressed into the back of the skull. There was a flash of red light. The man slackened. Now he looked grotesque, a hanging puppet with an oversized horned head. The nun resumed her place in the airborne pentagram. The skull trembled, then shuddered, then shook. Its eye sockets, which had been shrouded in shadow, were lit by two red flames. The man's body elongated and ripped. From within him, a form twisted and birthed itself into existence, a being of fiend fire and darkness, rending the fabric between worlds. Granger had opened the gates of hell. As it tore its way into existence, the thing vomited a sound out of the goat's skull that was half unholy laughter, half pain. It was suffering, but there was a hideous anticipation in it. Limbs took shape. The thing was tall. The skull hung at the end of a long neck. Stringy wings, black and dripping with abominable afterbirth, unfurled. Two cloven hooves reached the earth and made unhallowed ground of that place. There were no light of conscience in the thing's flaming eyes, only a terrible thirst for death. The nuns, breaking into shrieking laughter, released their paralysis spell within the confines of the pentagram. It was not to give the werewolves a chance. It was for sport. The demon's soul-blighting laughter joined that of the nuns, hell in its eyes. It launched itself at the werewolves. Half of them tried to run, half launched spells. A curling talon swiped at 5 of them and left corpses in its wake. Liquid fire was disgorged and burnt a dozen where they stood. The searing blow of a wing left a group of men standing without their fronts. No faces, no skin, only guts and bone. They fell with a wet sound. Those trying to run found themselves hemmed in by the pentagram, repelled and cast back towards the demon's cloven hooves. There was the crunch of skulls being crushed and hoarse, unearthly cackle from the creature. 10 killing curses flashed green and hit the demon at the same time. They did nothing. The thing wasn't alive. It was the prince of some underworld, and they were merely stoking its fire. The spellcasters were gutted. The nuns held the pentagram. The demon dared not or could not go beyond, but it did not matter. It found its pleasure within those ungodly confines. Its rampage was sickening, hideous, perfect. The screams and its laughter mingled in a ghastly chorus. The shrieks lessened and lessened as the demon made its way through its feast. Now there was only the sound of its terrible pleasure and the shatter of bone. It saved Greyback for last. Greyback fled from one end of the pentagram to the other, desperately hammering at it with its curses. The nuns laughed. He aimed killing curses towards them. They dodged and laughed even more. The demon caught sight of its final victim. The goat skull tilted. A plume of flame emerged from black nostrils. Greyback was panicking, scrambling. He pushed his way into the pentagram and was repelled backwards. He landed by the demon's feet. It planted one cloven hoof into the center of Greyback's chest. Draco had the vast pleasure of watching Greyback torn limb from limb and eaten. The massacre was complete. There had been 200 of Greyback's men in the pentagram. Now nothing within it moved, save for the demon. The air was fetid in brimstone and sulfur and heat-curdled blood. The nuns began another chant in voices high and pure, the Lord's Prayer. As the prayer went on, the nuns drew forwards on their brooms. The pentagram shrank. A heavenly halo glowed now above each nun's head. Their crucifixes floated off of their necks, shone with a pious light. The demon hissed and spat plumes as hellfire of the bounds of the pentagram came in towards it. The field shook with its discordant, infernal screams as it was forced inwards, and inwards again, until it had curled itself into a shadowy ball. But deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All that remained of the demon was the goat's skull. Then it, too, disappeared in a flash of red. The holy oars surrounding the nuns faded. They broke the pentagram and began a leisurely flyover of the battlefield, cursing any member of Greyback's pack that still twitched. The prioress flew over Draco and Granger, her wand raised. She eyed his aura insignia and Granger's lab coat and moved on. Draco, petrified of her in both the physical and metaphorical sense, had never been happier to be irrelevant. The nuns were satisfied with their absolute victory. They continued a driving rain, something of a holy water, something of a Genesis flood, that quenched the fires left behind by the demon and washed that unhallowed ground clean. They released their paralysis over the remainder of the battlefield, as witches and wizards began to sit up with gasps and groans. One of the nuns threw an entire tin of flue powder at Granger's fire. It flared green. The nuns flew into the flames and were gone. The aftermath of the battle was a mess of muck and blood and confusion. The anti-apparition ward fell. Someone summoned Mediwitches who apparated across the field and distributed potions and healings to those who needed it the most. A pair of them worked on Draco and Granger until they were satisfied that they were stable. They moved on to Potter and Weasley, both of whom were groaning enough to confirm that they were alive and well. Draco and Granger looked at each other, filthy, cut up, bruised, and battered. Across Granger's face was a wide spray of blood. Droplets of it decorated her cheeks in a fine mist, running down in rivulets now as the rain washed it away. Draco felt the wet on his face and knew that he was similarly adorned, some his, some that of others. They sat up and reached for each other's hands, face, shoulders, blurting out as many a flurry of questions. Are you hurt? Bloody hell, did they get you? Are you all right? Can you stand? Are you sure you're all right? I saw you get hit. Can you walk? Oh, thank God. You're all right. You're okay. You almost got killed, you stupid, bloody idiot. They found their feet. He held her dear, bruised-up face in his hands, and she held his in hers. He kissed her, softly under the downpour, softly against her split lip, softly amongst tears and rain and blood. She slid her arms around his neck and rose upon her tiptoes and kissed him back. Draco knew happiness then. Happiness was her, alive, her tear-filled eyes spilling over, her heartbeat thudding against his chest. It was knowing that her greatest threat was dead and gone. It was the beauty of days ahead that he hardly dared imagine. It was the feel of fingers in his hair. It was the shudder of her half-crying, half-laughing. It was her whisper of, "You absolute idiot," against his mouth. She pushed her face into his chest and gasped out sobs of relief and joy. There was movement around them. Potter and Weasley were on their feet. Tonks, looking like herself again, limping towards them, as did Gogan and Buckley. As he held Granger to his heart, Draco, frankly, did not give a single solitary fuck about the opinions of his colleagues. He only cared about her, about this exquisite catastrophe, this beautiful, stupid disaster. There were gasps, then grins. Then Weasley chortled and said, "Steady on, mate." And Potter burst into wild laughter and said, "I told you! I bloody told you!" Granger hid her face in Draco's cloak, shaking with something that verged on hysterical giggling. Tonks, one eye swelled shut, put a fist on her hip, observed them with pursed lips. "I suppose this is what the word was going to be about?" "Yes," said Draco. "I'm, no longer able to be objective. Funnily, I had worked that out just now when I watched you walk into a curse for her," said Tonks. "You're off the Granger assignment, Malfoy." "Brilliant," said Draco, a wide smile upon his face. Tonks shook her head, but there was a smile on her face, too. "Sorry to interrupt the love-making, but can someone please explain the fucking nuns?" asked Gogan with a gesture to the sky. All eyes were now on Granger. "They, owed me a favor," said Granger. "A favor?" said Potter, looking at her in wonder. "You properly called in the cavalry, Hermione." "I'm inspired," said Tonks. "I think that demon would make a fine Auror." The group wandered the muddy battlefield, variously looking for colleagues, or wands, or, in the case of Draco, bits of family jewelry. Draco's wand was located near Granger's fire. Granger was in a gooey pile of what looked suspiciously like demon-chewed human flesh near the boulder. She plucked it out with a grimace. "I believe that this is all that remains of Fenrir Greyback." Draco pointed his wand at the pile of charred mints and said, "Accio Malfoy ring." A deformed piece of silver whizzed towards him, not from the pile, but from a spot a few meters away. Granger winced. "Oh no, he ripped it off me and smashed it to bits as soon as he saw me turn it." "It's fixable," said Draco, pocketing the damage. "Everything is." She looked at him with a swift smile. "Everything is. Shall we go home?" "Yes, please. Let's." At the manor, they showered and found one another in the small salon at the back of the house. Granger came down in her most appalling pajamas. Henriette and Tupi were given a redacted version of the day's events, so that they would not grow hysterical. Opimum was brewed to palliate the shock and soften the day's emotional toil. Granger explained her kidnap, such as it was. "Someone tampered with the flue at the lab." "What?" "Yes, I know. It was meant to only have two connections, the lab and the manor. I stepped into it to come here, and I promise you I said Malfoy Manor. And the next thing I knew, I was spinning out onto a field, and that monster was in front of me, and they disarmed me the moment I landed. Greyback saw me twist the ring and tore it off me. I thought he was going to rip my fingers off. He was so rough. He knocked me out for trying to call for help. Absolute ulcer of a man. And, of course, Fernsby hadn't followed me into the flue. I was coming straight here. He had no reason to." Draco paced. "Who tampered with the fucking flue? I'm not even going to use my wand. I will strangle them with my bare hands. And the bloody nuns?" Granger, who was curled on the sofa with her arms wrapped around her legs, tucked her face into her knees and laughed. "I still can't believe that worked." "How?" "After having seen a bit of what they were capable of at the monastery, when I returned to the skull, I thought it might be useful to, harness the nuns for our benefit, if I could." "Of course you did." "When I sent the skull back, I pretended to be a collector who had bought it off a gang of thieves. I told the good sisters that I was returning it to them because it was sentient, and it deserved to be in its own home. It seemed wrong to keep it. I said if they wanted vengeance on the gang, I could help them. I told them what tracking spell to look out for, that I'd activate it when the moment was right for them to exert their revenge." Granger swallowed. "I didn't expect them to exert it so thoroughly. Anyway, I've been practicing that bloody flu spell for weeks and weeks. Finally got it down to 3 minutes. It's as difficult as Portus, possibly even worse. I hate it and will never cast it again. The flu specialist that came to my laboratory gave me a decent tutorial, and I studied the rest. I knew the nuns wouldn't be able to apparate across the channel, but if I had a flu connection open wherever I was, then I activated the tracking spell, then we'd have a chance." Draco was too gobsmacked to make any sort of articulate commentary. He merely said, "Fucking hell, Granger." I rubbed his palm against his forehead. "I know," said Granger. and maybe the more ghoulish of the opportunists between us." He stared at her. She laughed into her knees again. "But speaking of tracking, how did you find me?" she asked. "When Greyback destroyed the ring, I was convinced that I was done for. There was simply no way you'd have had time to even attempt an apparition to me." "Your hairpins," said Draco. "My hairpins?" blinked Granger. Draco made a general gesture towards her hair. "They're everywhere, and you always have them on you. I've been doing it since our first meeting. They've come in handy a time or two." Granger pulled a hairpin out of her curls and cast a revelation spell. It glowed green. "Of course," continued Draco, "next to Miss Flew the fucking Nun's in, it feels rather uninspired now." "I think it's brilliant," said Granger, smiling at the hairpin. "The simplest ideas often are." "Right. This explains Uffington." "Yes. You're a wily one." "So are you." Henriette popped into existence. "Pardonnez-moi, monsieur, mademoiselle. Madame Tonks is fluing. She would like to come in, if this is a convenient moment. She has a Mademoiselle Brimble with her." "Send them in," said Draco. A moment later, Tonks' voice echoed down the corridor as she queried Henriette. "Not interrupting, are we? They aren't up to anything? Bit of slap and tickle?" No, madame." Granger was pink in the cheeks. Tonks burst into the room with a ridiculous amount of vigor, considering what they had just gone through a few hours ago. "Hermione, that is an outfit," she said, spotting Granger's pajamas. "Small wonder Draco couldn't keep his hands off you." Granger grew even pinker. "Tonks!" "What? Is it not true?" Brimble followed meekly behind Tonks, clutching at a stack of parchment. It distracted Tonks from the pajamas. "Right. Brimble's got news. Tell us what you found out so that we can properly be outraged together." Henriette cracked into existence again. "So sorry. Messieurs Potter and Weasley are at the Flu, and they—" Messieurs Potter and Weasley had not waited to be invited in. Their footsteps of shouts of "Hermione! Malfoy! Where are you?" echoed through the manor, until Tonks stuck her head out of the salon and waved them in. Draco's vision of a quiet evening of rest and recuperation, and snogging Granger, was fast fading. Henriette served opimum to the newcomers as they settled into sofas. Brimble briefed them on her findings. In the end, the Auror office really had done all it could have. Granger had been betrayed by two relative unknowns who would have been difficult to preempt. "First bit of news. There's been an arrest," said Brimble. "A Mr. Terrace just turned himself in. Flu technician from the Department of Magical Transportation. Says he's the one responsible for tampering with the hearth in Healer Granger's laboratory. Greyback kidnapped his wife and children yesterday and gave him 12 hours to do it, or they died." "No!" gasped Granger. "The family is fine. They were found bound and gagged, but otherwise unharmed. Mr. Terrace is cooperating. It sounds as though he was quite repentant, actually. Rather a lot of crying." Granger looked at Draco. "No strangling." "Yes, strangling," said Draco, who did not find this to be an adequate excuse for what the man had done. Tonks observed them with pursed lips. "Kindly discuss your bedroom plans at another time. Brimble is talking." Granger blushed. Weasley guffawed. One of the Potters' eyes twitched. "As for my second bit of news," said Brimble, taking out a long scroll of parchment, "this is a list of the dead, the ones whose remains we could identify anyway." She held up the list. A name was circled on it. "A Miss Clotilde Fiddlewood." "Who?" said Granger. "What?" said Potter. "No," said Weasley. "Shacklebolt's assistant," said Tonks, her lips pressed into an unhappy line. "That old cacklebag," said Draco. That had been the witch who had looked familiar on the field, the one who had been patching the ward, barring their escape. Brimble nodded. "We can't interrogate her, obviously, but we are speculating that she may have overheard bits of Healer Granger's very first conversation with the minister, the one that triggered his protection request. Getting word to Greyback would have taken her months. He was deep in hiding at that time. We'll be investigating what we can, and we may never know for certain. But she was on one of the few individuals who could have known anything, and, of course, to find her running with Greyback's pack afterwards is rather damning evidence." They sat in silence. Granger looked shocked. Draco shook his head. Then, in the quiet, Potter said, "Greyback is dead." Saying it made it real. Granger's hands found her cheeks. "Greyback is dead." "Greyback is fucking dead," repeated Draco and Tonks. "The arsehole is dead," said Weasley. They touched their cups of opimum together. "Right," said Weasley after downing his. He clapped his hands together. "What's a bloke got to do to get a real drink around here?" They decided to make a proper party of it. Patronuses and jots were sent out. Soon the salon was filled with family and friends, Lupin and the kids, Potter's wife and tots, Luna Lovegood drifting dreamily about, Granger's colleagues and star students, Shacklebolt enduring much piss-taking on his choice of assistant, Oars and their families, a host of healers. Word of the victory and party got out, and more people began to pour in, many in sleepwear because of the late hour. Longbottom and Pansy, Zabini and Patel, the entire Weasley clan, God's help Draco, Macmillan and the other ministry colleagues, and finally, Theo in a set of ridiculously sheer men's pajamas. Henriette, Tupi, and the kitchen elves were delighted to assist in the merrymaking. Tupi plied Weasley in particular with the hardest stuff in his cellars. At some point during the festivities, Potter and Weasley waylaid Draco as he was making his way towards Granger. Draco found himself pressed into a corner by his favorite colleagues. They were all properly sloshed. "What?" said Draco. "I knew it. I knew you were up to something," said Potter, leaning in so close that his boozy breath wafted up Draco's nose. "I saw how you looked at her." Draco pushed him away. "Back off, you specky fucker. What are your intentions with Hermione?" "My intentions? If we return to the Victorian era, are you her father?" "Answer the question, Malfoy," said Weasley with what was presumably meant to be a threatening loom. It ended up less than intimidating as he finished the movement by resting his head on Draco's shoulder. "I haven't any intention," said Draco. "Get off me." He held Weasley at arm's length. "You smell good," said Weasley. "He smells good," he repeated to Potter. "Does he?" Potter came in for a whiff. "Get away," said Draco, now holding Potter at arm's length too. "Did you do something to her?" asked Weasley. One eye narrowed in suspicion. The other was closed and taking a nap. "Douse her with the love potion?" "Of bloody course not. Women fall for me all the time. I know that's a novel concept for you." "What about you?" asked Potter. "Are you in love with her?" That's none of your business. Why don't you ask her if she dosed me?" "Because she's not a scoundrel like you," said Potter. A miscreant," said Weasley. Draco attempted to say tisk, but all he could hammer out at that came out was a raspberry. "You're both under the delusion that she's a perfect angel, but she's 10 times the scoundrel I am. That's why You what?" asked Potter. "Like her." "You like her?" "Yes." "You're her Auror, you know," said Potter, aiming a vague finger at Draco's direction. "That is unprofessional. Not allowed." Unprofessional," repeated Weasley. "Was her Auror. And I never... We didn't cross the line. If we did, it didn't really happen." Potter blinked unfocused eyes. "Did it, or didn't it happen?" "Dreams. By a window ledge. Fantasies. In Spain. Nothing was real. It was Sam Hain, you know. We got drunk on fire. Genuinely, you have to admire the Spanish. They know how to make it drink. Or was it the Celts? Anyway, it was all fantasies. Gorgeous fantasies." "Stop talking to us about your fantasies," said Weasley, looking alarmed. "They are excellent, though." "Right. My favorite one is when she..." "No," said Potter, pressing his hand to Draco's mouth. "Do not." Draco beat his hand away. "Why are your fingers sticky?" Potter looked at his fingers with intense focus. Treacle tart," he declared with a firm nod. "There isn't any treacle tart." Weasley, endeavoring to be helpful, poured his fire whiskey on Potter's hand and all over Draco's shoes. "Thank you," said Potter gravely to Weasley as he wiped his hands on his robe. "You are a true friend." "You idiot! Now my toes are moist," spat Draco. "Unlike Malfoy, who is a tosser. Listen, Malfoy, if you do anything to Yurt her, hurt her, we will Yurter you, murder you, kill you in cold blood," said Weasley. "Set fire to your house, liberate your elves." "I would never do anything to Yurt her," said Draco in a rare drunken plunge into genuine honesty. "Wouldn't you?" "No. Right. It's none of your fucking business, as I've just said." Weasley grasped Draco's collar, and with a kind of plaintive desperation said, "You promise you'd never do anything to hurt her?" "Yes." Weasley pressed his forehead to Draco's and stared into his eyes. "I think he's telling the truth." "Stop that. Get off me. You're not a legilimens." "Do we give him our blessing?" asked Potter, frowning into space. "I don't need your fucking blessing," said Draco. "It would matter to Hermione," said Weasley. "She doesn't need it either," said Draco. "Tell him that we'll kill him if he hurts her," said Potter. "We already did," said Weasley, "I think." "Right. Do you think we should just kill him now?" asked Weasley. Preemptively? Asked Potter. Yeah, I reckon that'd be the proper proactive of us. I like it. Draco pushed Weasley away. For fuck's stop breathing on me, Weasley. Ugh. Why are you so moist? Why is everything moist and sticky? Get away. Right. I would never hurt her. She's genuinely important to me. I care about her. A lot. Too much, really. To an idiotic degree. I wish I didn't. But I do, and it's... Anyway, this is not a conversation I wish to have with you slobbering imbeciles. You can kill me if I hurt her, but I won't. I would never. She'll be the one hurting me, if anything. That's my fear. My fucking boggart. All right? Have we finished here? Potter and Weasley narrowed their eyes, but it was unclear whether they were processing Draco's diatribe or merely falling asleep. I think he's all right, said Weasley. Potter nodded and said, I'm satisfied. Oh, said Draco, are you? Good. Now bugger off. I need to change my shoes because you are literally incapable of holding a glass upright. Toopy, fresh shoes and socks, please. Weasley had an accident. They rejoined the party, got even more drunk, and pissed away the night in high spirits. Draco had fallen asleep on one of the sofas. He awoke at dawn with a stiff neck and a throbbing headache. He rose and stepped over bodies in various states of consciousness. Granger was nowhere to be found. Henriette was making her way through the salon, placing a croissant and a hangover potion beside every snoring guest. Where's Mademoiselle? Asked Draco. I believe she went to take some air, monsieur, said Henriette. Shall I call her? No, I'll find her. Draco downed one of the hangover potions. Then he stood at the window and sighed a melodramatic sigh. Is everything all right? Asked Henriette. Draco pressed his forehead to the cold window. No. Henriette approached. What is the matter? Henriette? Oui? Je suis un sorceleur. Ah! Je l'aime de tout mon cœur, de tout mon être. Henriette put down her plate of croissants and wrung her hands. Don't be happy yet, said Draco. No? No, I haven't told her, but I am going to tell her. I am off to bare my soul, Henriette. Henriette watched him go with tears in her eyes and her hands clasped to her chest. Bon courage, monsieur, she said in a whisper. The December dawn brightened the eastern sky. Draco found Granger amongst silver birch and rising mist, walking a slow walk through the trees. It was cold. She looked pale and tired as she stepped along the path. She had wrapped herself in a sort of shawl that looked suspiciously like one of Draco's handkerchiefs, transfigured. Her hair was only half pinned and tumbled down her back. She spotted him in the distance. She paused and watched him come to her amidst the frozen gorse and fence edge. Everything about her seemed distinct and sharp, uncannily so. Breath misting from between parted lips, fingers gripping the shawl, dark lashes around her bright eyes. You're awake early, she said with a kind of soft surprise. When Draco continued to stare at her like a love-struck cretin, she asked, Are you all right? Is something the matter? He was taken by a kind of fool's courage, an idiot's courage. It was true courage, for all of that. After this, things would never be the same. Yes, something is the matter, said Draco. Oh? Something is very the matter. I need to tell you something. It's stupid and probably a bad decision, but it feels like it's going to kill me if I don't, so... Granger was regarding him with curiosity, with something serious. With her puzzle-solving look, she pulled the shawl more closely around herself. Well, he was going to solve the bloody puzzle for her, right now. I don't want to maintain the equilibrium, said Draco. I don't want to quash any more. The equilibrium? Repeated Granger. Quash? The back and forth. The not daring to do more, the not crossing the line. The blaming of booze for my lapses. The pretending I don't care for you, that I wouldn't die for you. I suppose that ship has already sailed, anyway. The denying, suppressing, slowly suffocating my heart. All of that. Draco took a moment to compose himself. Not composed at all, he continued. You're fucking brilliant and beautiful beyond anything. It's actually quite unfair that one person should have all of those attributes. I want to be more than your aura. I want you to be more than my principal, or healer, or any of your many and diverse titles. I've fallen for you, despite what I've been, I swear to you, a most sincere railing against. I know it was wrong, inappropriate, contravened all the protocols, all the rot. I did everything a man could do to quash those feelings, but I failed. You are too much. I couldn't withstand you. You found fissures in my defense, and you tore them into bloody great rends. And then you came to live in my heart. like some sort of light in a dark place. And the worst part is, I know you didn't do it on purpose. I know you didn't ask for it. I know you were just being you, your stupid, brilliant, do-gooding self. But you are, as it turns out, everything I want. He dared to look at her. There were tears in her eyes. Right, now I've bloody made you cry. Brilliant. Me? Asked Granger in a shaky voice. I'm the one finding fissures. I couldn't withstand you. What? Granger took a breath. I keep trying to control it, but it's stronger than me. I don't want it. I didn't want it. I don't know what I want. Yes, I do. I want one sodding night without thinking about you. I want to be in the same room as you without feeling that I'll die if I don't touch you. If I do touch you, I want my head to be in my own again. I want my heart. But you're in them both, you idiot. You're driving me round the bend. She brushed away a tear. I just want to know a bloody moment of peace without you in my brain, but that is apparently too much to ask for. What about me? I can't cast the thought of you from my mind. Your smile, you doing arithmancy? Bloody Spain. Do you know what my amortentia smells like? Do you know how much you haunt my nights? I hate this, sniffed Granger. It's rubbish. I hate not being in control. I shouldn't have any sorts of feelings for you. This is your fault. My fault? Why did you have to be so what? Granger threw her hands into the air. So everything. You were meant to be an arrogant, moderately competent Auror. You weren't meant to be funny and endearing and heroic and gentlemanly when it mattered. You weren't meant to literally charm my knickers off, and worse still, worm your way into my heart. Speak for yourself, said Draco, outraged. You're the wormy one. You weren't meant to be an insufferable swat with those presents I can't stand. Not someone whose company, laughter, kisses, everything I ended up craving like a bewitched, lovesick fool. Do you know how many bloody dates I went on to push you out of my head? I went on a date with that stupid gardener. What? You set me up. Gods, how could I be in love with you? You're Draco Malfoy. And me? I'm in love with Hermione Granger. Head over fucking heels. I don't do love. I can't even say the word. It feels horrid in my mouth. I should never have accepted this arrangement, said Granger, addressing the sky. I should have insisted someone else, the moment I saw your stupid name on that stupid letter telling me that I had been assigned to you. I tried, said Draco. I was told not to have a complex about Granger. Well, here we are. A complex? And now I have one. Yes, a complex, a great bloody complex about Granger, beyond their wildest expectations. I don't want your complex. Well, you have it, and far more besides. Silence fell. Granger wiped away a tear. Draco took a step closer to her. Their hands reached for one another. I feel as though I've given you a part of me that you could break, said Granger. Please don't break it. I shan't break it. I would never. Potter and Weasley have informed me that they will kill me if I hurt you. Not that their threats count for anything. And you have a part of me. I'm sick over it, and you better not break it. I would never. And why must you be so beautiful, even when you're crying? How do you make looking like a hungover vampire so alluring? I'm going to snog the living daylights out of you. Her smile broke through the tears, a flash of sun. She was happiness aglow in his veins. She had his little black heart in its entirety. He closed the distance between them. He held her face in his hands. Their breath misted together in the cold air. The sun rose in earnest, and it brightened the snow, and greened the grass, and wreathed them in light. He kissed her, and it was the sweetest, most searing, most wondrous thing to finally be able to do so, without interruption, without excuses, without breaking away. To do it knowing that his torment was shared, and had therefore become something else, a relief, a thundering joy. He had a part of her, and she had a part of him, and it was going to be something beautiful. Could there be anything sweeter? Could there be any more bliss than this?